move ahead to the next talk, and that's by again Dr. Peter Duffy on adverse events. Is M&M conference the only way to wrap up? Dr. Duffy?
So again, if we can go ahead with the
Okay, yeah, we're going to go ahead. We are going to do that.
So we can Good evening, and again, thank you for the privilege of coming to your conference and speaking about some important topics. The first topic tonight I'm going to speak on is M&M conference. Is an M&M conference the only way to wrap up? Again, I'm Peter Duffy. I'm an interventional cardiologist. I've been on the executive committee, board of trustees, and been treasurer of the Society of Cardiac Angiography and Interventions, or SCI, and I remain a practicing interventional cardiologist here in both North Carolina and South Carolina in the United States. So let's talk a little bit first about why we should even have key conferences. And I think the main reason to focus on is best practices. There's the reasons that we want to have the conferences and the reason regulatory bodies want to have the conferences. But the main thing I think to consider is we want to have our best practices. We want to see where there may be gaps in our ability to care for patients that can be covered, and we can do better to take care of those patients if we know what they are and identify processes for improvement there. And it does truly foster interdisciplinary collaboration with not just cardiology, but vascular surgery and cardiothoracic surgery, internal medicine, and general cardiology when we have these kinds of conferences. But from a regulatory standpoint, in the United States, it's important for maintaining continuing medical education credits. In many cases, it's required by regulators, such as in our system, the Joint Commission, which accredits our hospitals. They require also that we have OPPE, or ongoing professional practice evaluation, which means that no matter how good you are or whether you've had any problems at all or not, you're still going to be looked at by your peers to make sure there's an ongoing process of continued quality. In many cases, it's required by the American College of Graduate Medical Education in order to credential fellowship programs there. And one aside is that these conferences should be independent. They're not sponsored by vendors. They're not commercially influenced. They really are for us and not for industry. So I'm going to speak about three key cath lab conferences, the first of which is the True Cath Lab Conference itself. The second is Angiographic Review. And the third is the M&M, or the Morbidity and Mortality Conference. So the Cath Conference really is a didactic, more educational type of conference that's done on a regular basis, usually weekly, and it focuses on cath lab best practices and issues related to the cath lab. The best way to do that is to have these conferences presented by fellows or by junior attendings, because it gives them the opportunity to prepare the talks, to go in depth on a particular subject of interest to the group. They can look at case reports, and they truly can lead the discussion. And this is important in their development as professionals, because it develops their leadership skills with respect to presenting to a group of their peers and being able to interact and lead group discussions. Usually it would highlight just one or a few topics, and there's a limited time for it. So it emphasizes some main take-home points, 1, 2, or at most 3 points that you want to walk out of the conference with, knowing something that you didn't before you came in. For time purposes, it can be combined with the Angiographic Review, which is the conference I'll talk about next, and you might spend 30 minutes on the cath conference itself, and then 30 minutes on the Angiographic Review. And it focuses again on gaps in knowledge where new information might be coming along that we've not yet brought fully into our cath lab there, or new information, new techniques, new technologies that somebody may have learned at a conference or learned from an article or some research that they had done to be able to share with the group. Importantly, too, it can incorporate individual metrics for review. So in the United States, we have the National Cardiovascular Data Registry, so we'll get feedback from them on different parameters such as bleeding complications, contrast-induced nephropathy. Those sorts of things can be looked at and discussed at a cath conference. The Angiographic Review is the second conference I'll talk about, and that's really more focused on cath lab and, as the name implies, looking at the films themselves. So it's an open random case review. In many systems, what's done is cases are randomly selected, and individuals who are there can discuss the presentation of the case, can discuss what their thought process was in doing the case, any decision-making points that they had there, any questions they had about decision-making points, for the education of everybody there. It's also a format for interesting cases. Somebody may have had something unusual, and then coronary anomaly or a different type of approach to an intervention that can be discussed in the Angiographic Review. And it includes both cath cases, just diagnostic procedures, and interventional procedures. So why do we want to have that angiographic review? Well, it can assure that we have the appropriate indications for doing the procedures in the first place, and that the intra-procedural decision-making conforms with guidelines. For example, was there an opportunity to use an atherectomy device? Was it used? And maybe it didn't need to be used. That can be a discussion for the group to have. So it permits learning from others' routine cases, not just when complications occur. It's a very proactive approach to the cath lab there. And it also allows us to review the independent criteria that are more objective, put out by SCI, by American College of Cardiology, what key opinion leaders think of how we ought to be approaching cases in the cath lab there. And it's an appropriate venue to openly discuss a collaborative plan for looking at cases that may have been questionable or inappropriate to approach to start with there. But again, the focus here is on process improvement. It is not a punitive process. The idea here is not to be giving somebody a hard time or to single out an individual. It's for everybody to work better, because the bottom line here is that we're not looking to restrict privileges. We're not looking to take privileges away or affect somebody's credentials. We're looking for process improvement as a team across the board. And last, I'm going to speak about the M&M conference, or the Morbidity and Mortality Conference. And this is basically focused just on the cath lab. We don't put clinical cardiology issues in this morbidity and mortality conference. It's really just to review cath lab complications. And again, why we want to do this? Well, meaningful practice improvement is critical there. So if there are complications, we need to learn from those complications. Complications are going to occur. Sometimes they're preventable, sometimes they're not. And if they're potentially preventable, it's important for the group to be able to look for ways to have tried to get around that, to again, not have the same complication occur in the future there. So it's an opportunity to review adverse events with peers. It's an opportunity for collaborative process improvement, and it engages multiple stakeholders. Again, physicians who are involved in cath lab care can all be involved in the M&M conference. And the focus, again, is on process improvement. It's a non-punitive process. The idea here is to discuss complications that have occurred in the lab there that we can all learn from. So how do we make that happen? Well, it's critical that this be seen as very objective, so that there has to be an independent cath lab person who's designated as the quality officer, who then identifies cases for review. So this has to be unbiased. This individual, this can be a rotating thing. Somebody can do it for 6 months or a year, 3 months, whatever. It should not be pretty much the same individual continually year after year after year. So that person then, or the group itself, is empowered to develop a system for unbiased incident reporting, and everyone should be empowered to report any incidents that they think should be reviewed. This includes the nurses, the techs, anybody aligned with the cath lab, even the patients and the families themselves. This is a meeting that usually occurs at least quarterly. It can occur usually monthly, just to at least say whether there is something that needs to be reviewed or not reviewed. Attendance by all cath lab staff is mandatory because, again, you want to have everybody involved. This is a team effort, and everybody on the team should be there for this team meeting. And it's multidisciplinary, so if you have vascular surgery involved, if you have EP involved, if you have your cardiothoracic surgeon involved, it's important to invite them to attend as well. And the case presentation should be independent. It should be done by a fellow or resident if possible. But one note of caution is that in a legal system, at least in the United States, some of this information can be what we call discoverable, meaning a plaintiff's attorney can ask for what was said at that meeting, what was the discussion, what were the minutes of that meeting. So it's important that hospital counsel be involved up front, because there is peer protection under most circumstances if it's done properly. But the hospital attorney should be involved in defining what those circumstances are, so that this information is kept simply within the group. So that's why to have it happen. How do we make it happen? Well, again, case selection based on complications. It's important that deaths be reviewed, hopefully within 30 days, because recollections go away after 30 days. If there is a death, and certainly if it's a preventable death, it's something we don't want to have occur again, because we didn't review it properly and learn from that in the first place. All major complications, though, should be reviewed. This would include strokes in the cath lab, cardiac arrest, those sorts of things. And these are shared also by the American College of Cardiology, by SCI, and sometimes state regulators require this be reviewed as well. And in your own lab, you might want to review complications in line with quality improvement projects, such as bleeding complications or contrast-induced nephropathy complications, again, which we get from the NCDR database, And it's not really a complication, but you might want to review your percent of same-day discharges. How many patients were appropriately discharged on the same day? How many could have gone home but didn't, as a process improvement measure? So that can be looked at there as well. It's important that the physician who's the primary operator in the case be there to discuss the case. Again, this is not a punitive action. This is in order to get input from that individual and understanding of that individual, what the thought process was while the case was going on. And lastly, it's important to keep sign-in sheets, case review forms, and create response and action plans, meaning, okay, this is what happened. How do we now address what happened? Do we have a better idea of how we potentially could have prevented that? And how will we review that going forward in the future? So this is really comes full circle. It's identifying the problem. It's identifying ways to improve the process there. And then it's cinching the deal by saying that we did improve the process and make things better overall. So that's briefly what it is on Cath Lab conferences. I'll be happy to take any questions folks may have there. And again, it's a privilege to be here with you.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to move ahead and have question answers at the end. The next talk is going to be by Dr. Faisal again on case of AMI gone wrong, lessons learned from a team.